let's dive into more of the nuts and bolts of what the growth process was like for your company Zygo. So now you had this, you're trialing these classes. You saw that, yeah, there's demand. People keep coming back for this. And then you actually created the company in 2017, right? What was that initial process like? I know that there's demand, but now like you have to, actually refine or fine tune the hardware. Now you have to, figure out how to get more classes on this app platform. So talk about some of the initial, I guess, growing pains that you had to go through in the beginning.
I mean, it's interesting because when you say 5 years, I'm like, whoa, that's kind of old, because it doesn't feel that way because I'll start at the beginning. So the first company ran the classes called Swim Team. And so at that time we were just running these classes in LA, and the hardware we were using, at first we were like, oh, we could just fine tune this piece of hardware. But we realized when we reverse engineered it, that it was from a small factory in China. And we realized that it was using an illegal government owned radio frequency. Okay. So it wasn't really saleable in the United States in general. So we very quickly learned that we had to not use that one, and we would have to build it from scratch. And so we started what is now Zygo, the company, at the end of 2017 to hold all the IP and all of the, for that separate company. And again, we were very ambitious, never having built hardware before. We thought we could, okay, we'll start on the hardware and we'll build it, and it'll take like a year. 3.5 years later. Yes. That's so basically from the end of 2017, we stopped running the classes because from a business model perspective, it just didn't work because you can only fit so many people in a pool, and you're paying like to rent the lanes, and you're dealing with like pool bureaucracy. It was like not a great system, though it did prove that there was a market. So from the end of 2017, we started on the hardware, not running classes. And we basically were developing hardware alongside engineers in our factory all of 2018, all of 2019, and only began shipping product in September of 2020. So what we thought was like going to be just a year ended up being closer to 3 years of R&D and building the hardware to then get it into consumers' hands. So like from our perspective, it really is, 2020 to now of our like actual sales for company.
So thinking back to, just real briefly for the listeners, right, to see how far and how intricate and how much time it took to develop this hardware, right? Talk briefly about what was the technology before. You said that they were using this kind of not so legal, I guess, or ethical radio frequency, but how did it work before? How were they transmitting the audio to the headsets?
Right. So as you kind of mentioned in the beginning, Bluetooth doesn't penetrate water. So you cannot use Bluetooth as a technology. Otherwise, it would be really easy for, just to have your Bluetooth tech work in the water. Mm-hmm. So you have to use radio frequency with a long enough wavelength to be able to penetrate the water. In the US and in every country, you have like a regulated open bandwidth of frequencies that you're able to utilize. And so when we reverse engineered the one that we were using, if you had an unlimited frequencies, like you could pick from a bunch of different ones, but because of like TV and military, I mean, there just has to be kind of a regulation around it. So the one that we were using was just using a band that the public domain cannot use in the US. So it worked the same as what our current system uses, basically, in that the transmitter transmits a radio frequency to the headset in a long enough wavelength to be able to penetrate water. It's just that the frequency they were using would not have gotten FCC approval. And we had to go through all of the, formal steps of getting approval, FCC, CE approval, to be able to have our hardware be an actual consumer product on the market.
So real briefly, and you can share whatever you want, but how were they getting these headsets? Who was making them?
Well, it was a small factory in China. And so they were like barely marketing it. And some people had bought them, but it was like one-off ones, but they weren't like technically selling it in the US, and there's no brand around it. So it's not really in the market. Like you can get them, but like if you're not really selling them, or like, it would take a lot for the government to like have to look into something that's not real. Yeah. So that, I mean, we found them somehow too, but they're not like, a brand that you can just find and buy for your own. Also, from a consumer standpoint, there wasn't a lot of thought around the look and the feel and the design and the user experience. So it again, in our minds, it was completely janky, but worked for the purpose that we needed it to at the time.